I'm Brigadier General Melissa Butcher. I'm 41, and I built my career from a mechanic's daughter to a flag officer in the United States Air Force. For years, I poured time, money, and loyalty into holding my family together, especially after my father remarried. But the night my stepmother grabbed the Medal of Honor off my dress at a military charity gala and accused me of stealing it, everything shifted. Have you ever been dismissed or humiliated by someone you sacrificed everything for? If you have, share your experience in the comments. Trust me, you're in good company. Before I dive into what happened, tell me where you're watching from. And if you've ever had to stand your ground after being disrespected, hit like and subscribe for more real stories about boundaries, self-worth, and taking your power back. What came after that night might not be what you expect. I grew up in a house that smelled like engine oil and instant coffee. My father, Thomas Butcher, worked 60-hour weeks as an aircraft mechanic, his hands permanently stained, his shoulders always a little hunched from bending over turbines. After my mother died when I was 8, it was just the two of us. We didn't talk much about feelings. We talked about fixing things, about showing up, about doing what needed to be done. That became our language. When I joined the Air Force at 18, Dad drove me to the recruiter's office in his work truck, still wearing his coveralls. He shook my hand when I signed the papers. No tears, no speeches. Just a firm grip and a nod that said everything he couldn't put into words. He was there when I graduated basic military training at Lackland, standing in the bleachers in a shirt he'd ironed himself. He was there when I commissioned as a second lieutenant, when I pinned on captain at 27. Every milestone, every duty station move, he found a way to be present. I made Captain 03. In the middle of what felt like the busiest years of my life. I was flying missions, managing teams, deploying frequently. The Air Force became my identity in ways I hadn't anticipated. It gave me structure, purpose, a clear path forward. Dad understood that. He'd spent his whole life in service to machines that kept people safe in the air. We both believed in the work, even when it cost us. That's when he met Lynn. I was deployed to the Middle East when he first mentioned her. A casual comment in an email. Started seeing someone. Thought you should know. No details, no fanfare. When I came home 4 months later, she was already part of his routine. Lynn was 52 then, 15 years younger than Dad, with carefully styled hair and a wardrobe that seemed too polished for someone dating a mechanic on a fixed income. But she was warm to me. Enthusiastic, even. She asked about my deployments, about the aircraft I flew, about what it was like being a woman in a male-dominated field. Your father talks about you constantly, she said over dinner that first night. I'm so proud to know you. It felt genuine. I wanted it to be genuine. Dad deserved companionship. He'd spent 15 years alone, never complaining, never asking for more than he had. If Lynn made him happy, that was enough for me. I told myself I'd be supportive, that I wouldn't be the difficult daughter who resented her father moving on. So when she started joining us for holidays, when she moved into the house a year later, I welcomed it. I helped them repaint the living room during a weekend of leave. I brought gifts when I visited. I tried. The first time I gave them money was when Dad had complications from a hernia surgery. The insurance covered most of it, but not all. There were copays, follow-up visits, medications that added up faster than his retirement income could handle. I didn't think twice. I wired $3,000 and told him not to worry about paying it back. Lynn thanked me over the phone, her voice thick with gratitude. You're an angel, Melissa. I don't know what we'd do without you. A few months later, the water heater broke. Then the roof needed repairs. Then Dad's truck threw a transmission. I helped each time. It wasn't charity, it was family. That's what you do. You show up. You fix things. You don't keep score. Lynn started introducing me to her friends at gatherings. This is my stepdaughter, she'd say, gesturing toward me with a practiced smile. She works in the military. Never my rank. Never specifics. Just vague enough to sound impressive without being too detailed. Her friends would nod politely and ask surface-level questions I'd answer briefly before the conversation moved on to other things. I made major at 3404 after a particularly demanding assignment managing logistics for a joint operations task force. The promotion came with more responsibility, longer hours, and a commendation that Dad framed and hung in his workshop. Lynn threw a small party, invited her social circle, and spent most of the evening talking about how she'd always known I'd go far. I pushed her. She told someone I'd never met. She needed that encouragement. Dad glanced at me across the room. I could see the question in his eyes, but I shook my head slightly. It wasn't worth correcting. Let her have the story. Over the next few years, I settled into a rhythm. I'd visit every few months when my schedule allowed, help out where I could, and keep my interactions with Lynn polite and functional. She'd softened in some ways, grown more comfortable in her role as Dad's partner. But there was also a shift I couldn't quite name. A subtle tightening of her tone when she spoke to me. An edge that hadn't been there before. She started commenting on my schedule. "You work too much, Melissa. Don't pilots burn out?" Or, when I couldn't rearrange leave to help with something minor, "You should be helping your father more." She'd rewrite small histories in conversation, casually revising who did what. When people asked about Dad's recovery, she'd say she handled everything, minimizing my actual involvement. I'd contributed time, money, and flexibility, but in her version, I was mostly absent, too busy with my career to really be there. I told myself it was insecurity. Adjustment. She was still figuring out how to be part of the family. When I made Lieutenant Colonel at 39.05 after a high-profile assignment coordinating multinational air defense exercises, Lynn called her relatives before I'd even told my closest friends. She framed the achievement as a family win, told everyone she'd always believed in me, always pushed me toward success. Dad didn't correct her. He just looked tired. Lynn had developed a new social circle by then, mostly spouses of local business owners and professionals. Their approval mattered to her in ways I didn't fully understand. She wanted to appear successful, affluent, connected. She talked about home renovations and weekend trips with a casualness that didn't quite match Dad's fixed income. When people asked how they managed, she'd smile and say something vague about family support, which meant me. She began making small comments about how I dressed off duty, how the ribbons and decorations on my uniform made me look like I was showing off. "People don't need to see all that," she said once. "It's a bit much, don't you think?" I started wearing civilian clothes more often when I visited. Then came the comment about my mother's brooch. It was a simple gold piece, delicate and understated, passed down through my mother's family. I wore it to formal events sometimes, pinned near my shoulder. Lynn saw me wearing it at a family gathering and pulled me aside. "People are going to think that's fake," she said quietly. "You should probably leave it at home." I stared at her. It was my mother's. "I know. I'm just saying. It looks expensive. People might get the wrong idea." Dad overheard. He didn't say anything, but his jaw tightened. He looked at me, then at Lynn, then walked outside. I should have said something then. I should have drawn a line. But I didn't want to create conflict. I didn't want to make Dad choose. So I let it go, filed it away with all the other small dismissals and quiet disrespects that had been accumulating for years. I didn't see the pattern yet. I didn't understand that Lynn was no longer interested in being part of the family. She was interested in controlling its image, in taking credit for its successes, in maintaining the appearance of stability without actually contributing the work. I missed the warning. Or maybe I ignored it. Because acknowledging it would have meant accepting that the woman my father loved didn't actually respect me. And I wasn't ready to face that yet. The signs became harder to ignore as Dad's health improved and Lynn's behavior shifted further. The warmth she'd shown early on had evaporated, replaced by something colder, more transactional. She stopped asking about my work unless other people were around. She stopped thanking me for help unless it was performative, staged for an audience. I made full colonel at 40.06 after leading a complex airlift operation during a humanitarian crisis that required 72 hours of continuous coordination across 4 time zones. The promotion was significant, a recognition of years of consistent performance and leadership under pressure. Dad was proud. He called me the night the announcement came through, his voice thick with emotion he didn't know how to express. "Your mother would have been proud too," he said. Lynn's reaction was different. She posted about it on social media before I'd even told most of my friends, tagging me in a long paragraph about our family's success and how she'd always known Melissa would achieve great things. The comments poured in, congratulatory messages from people I'd never met, all directed at Lynn as much as at me. She responded to each one, basking in reflected accomplishment. When I visited the following month, she'd printed the post and framed it. It hung in the hallway, next to photos of Dad's military service and my academy graduation. Except the focus wasn't the achievement itself, it was Lynn's narration of it. Her comments about my career grew more pointed. She'd ask why I wasn't married, why I'd chosen work over family, why I didn't visit more often. Each question carried an implied criticism, a suggestion that my priorities were wrong, that I was somehow failing at the parts of life that mattered. "You're so focused on rank," she said once, during a conversation I hadn't invited. "But what are you building outside of that?" I didn't answer. I was building competence, trust, leadership. I was responsible for hundreds of personnel, millions of dollars in equipment, missions that required precision and judgment. But explaining that to Lynn felt pointless. She'd already decided what my life meant. She started correcting me in front of others, small things that didn't warrant pushback but accumulated like paper cuts. How I loaded the dishwasher. How I parked in the driveway. How I folded the towels. Each correction delivered with a smile, with a veneer of helpfulness, but the message underneath was clear: you don't belong here the way I do. Dad noticed. I could see it in the way he'd changed the subject when Lynn started in on me, the way he'd offer to help with something just to get me out of the room. But he never said anything directly. He was trying to keep peace in his own home, caught between the daughter he'd raised and the woman he'd chosen. I started visiting less. Not dramatically, not with any announcement. Just gradually spacing out trips, finding reasons to stay on base during long weekends, volunteering for additional duties that kept me occupied. It was easier than sitting in that house, absorbing small humiliations while pretending everything was fine. Lynn's social circle became her primary focus. She hosted dinners, organized charity events, positioned herself as a central figure in a group of people who valued appearances above all else. She thrived in that environment, where surface-level charm and careful presentation mattered more than substance. Her friends admired her home, her style, her seemingly perfect life. They didn't see the tension underneath, the way she controlled every detail, the way she rewrote reality to suit her narrative. She started implying to people that I was difficult. Not directly, never overtly, but in the way she'd sigh when my name came up, the way she'd mention how busy I always was, how I never had time for family. She painted herself as the patient, understanding stepmother dealing with a daughter who'd grown distant and cold. I heard about it through a cousin who'd attended one of Lynn's gatherings. She'd mentioned it casually, not realizing how it would land. Lynn was saying, "You don't visit much anymore. She seems worried about you." Worried. As if my absence was the problem, not the environment that made visiting unbearable. The breaking point started building the day she criticized my uniform. I'd stopped by during a brief leave, still in service dress, because I'd come directly from a meeting at the regional command. Lynn looked at my ribbons and decorations, the visible record of years of service, and frowned. "It's too much," she said. "You look like you're trying to show off." I stared at her. "This is the regulation uniform." "I know, but still. It's a lot. People might think you're being arrogant." Dad set his coffee down too hard. "Lynn." She turned to him, expression innocent. "What?" "I'm just saying." I left the room before I said something I'd regret. The comments about my mother's brooch came up again. Lynn mentioned it to one of her friends while I was there, saying she'd tried to suggest I not wear it because it gives the wrong impression. The friend glanced at me uncomfortably, clearly unsure how to respond. "It was my mother's," I said evenly. Lynn smiled. "I know, sweetheart. I'm just thinking of how it looks to other people." The condescension in "sweetheart" hung in the air. I realized then that Lynn had been building a case against me for years. Each small comment, each implied criticism, each rewritten history was part of a larger narrative she was constructing. The difficult stepdaughter who didn't appreciate what she had, who was too career-focused to be a real part of the family, who needed Lynn's guidance and patience. And I'd let her. I'd stayed quiet to keep the peace. I'd absorbed the disrespect because I didn't want to burden Dad with conflict. I'd told myself it wasn't that bad, that I was overreacting, that she didn't really mean it the way it sounded. But she did. And it was. I started keeping a mental distance after that. I'd be polite, functional, present when required. But I stopped offering more than the minimum. I stopped helping financially unless Dad asked directly. I stopped rearranging my schedule to accommodate last-minute requests. I stopped pretending Lynn's behavior didn't bother me. She noticed. And she didn't like it. The military charity gala was held at a hotel ballroom downtown, a formal event supporting veteran transition programs. I'd been invited as a guest of honor, one of several senior officers recognized for contributions to the cause. Dad was excited to attend. Lynn insisted on coming, talked for weeks about what she'd wear, about who might be there, about the prestige of being associated with the event. I wore a simple black dress, fitted but not flashy, appropriate for the setting. At my shoulder, I pinned my mother's brooch, the gold piece I'd worn for years, a small link to the woman I barely remembered, but whose strength I tried to carry forward. We arrived at 1900 hours. The ballroom was already filling, a mix of active-duty personnel, veterans, and civilians connected to various military organizations. I recognized several faces, exchanged greetings, introduced Dad to colleagues who'd heard me mention him over the years. He was proud, uncomfortable in his suit, but standing straight, shaking hands with genuine warmth. Lynn stayed close, observing, cataloging, positioning herself to be included in photos and conversations. She introduced herself as my stepmother to anyone who'd listen, laughed too loudly at jokes she didn't quite understand, touched Dad's arm possessively whenever someone paid too much attention to him. I was talking with a Navy commander about joint logistics when Lynn approached. She waited until the commander stepped away, then moved close, her voice low and sharp. "Where did you get that?" I looked at her, confused. "What?" She gestured toward the brooch. "That? Don't tell me you bought something like that on your salary." The accusation landed like a physical blow. I felt the heat rise in my face, the instinctive need to defend myself. It was my mother's. That's not what it looks like. Her eyes locked onto the brooch, her expression shifting to something harder, colder. "You stole this." The words came out quietly, but the venom was unmistakable. I froze. Around us, the gala continued, voices and laughter blending into background noise. Lynn's hand moved toward the brooch, her fingers closing around it. "You're too poor to be wearing something like this," she hissed. She pulled. Hard. The pin dug into the fabric of my dress, the sudden pressure wrenching my shoulder forward. I tried to step back, to create space, but her grip tightened. She was trying to rip it off me, in the middle of a ballroom full of military personnel and veterans, in front of colleagues and strangers, in front of my father. A hand closed around her wrist. Lynn gasped, her grip releasing as someone gently but firmly pulled her hand away from my dress. I looked up and saw an older man, probably mid-70s, leaning on a cane with one hand while holding Lynn's wrist with the other. He wore a simple suit, a few ribbons pinned to his lapel, the posture of someone who'd spent decades in uniform and never fully left it behind. He looked at Lynn, his expression calm but unyielding. "Lady," he said quietly, "that is the Medal of Honor." The room didn't exactly go silent, but I felt the shift. People nearby turned, paying attention now, picking up on the tension. Lynn's face went pale. She tried to pull her hand back, but the man held firm for another second before releasing her. "Do you not know who she is?" he added, his voice still calm, still quiet, but carrying weight that silenced the space around us. Lynn stepped back, her expression cycling through shock, confusion, and something close to panic. She looked at me, at the brooch, at the people watching, trying to piece together what had just happened. Dad appeared at my side, his face flushed with shame. Not shame for me. Shame for her. The older man nodded once, a small acknowledgement, then stepped back into the crowd. I didn't know his name yet, didn't know anything about him except that he'd seen what was happening and intervened. Lynn opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Don't, I said quietly. She looked at Dad, searching for support, for someone to tell her it was okay, that she'd just made a mistake. But Dad didn't move. He stood next to me, solid and silent, and I felt the years of quiet loyalty reassert themselves. Lynn turned and walked away, moving through the crowd toward the exit. A few people watched her go. Most returned to their conversations, the moment passing as quickly as it had erupted. But it wasn't the public spectacle that hurt. It wasn't the scene, the attention, the embarrassment. It was the instinct. The immediate assumption that anything beautiful on me couldn't possibly belong to me. that I must have stolen it because in Lynn's mind, I was always somehow less. Always too poor, too undeserving, too much of a pretender to wear something valuable. I stood there, the brooch still pinned to my dress, slightly askew now from her pulling. My shoulder ached. My chest felt tight. Dad touched my arm gently. "I'm sorry," he said. I nodded, not trusting my voice. The gala continued around us, but I'd stopped being present. I stayed another hour because leaving immediately would have drawn more attention, would have made the moment bigger than it needed to be. I smiled when required, answered questions, accepted congratulations for an award I barely registered receiving. But inside, something had broken. Not my resolve. Not my confidence. The pretense. The belief that staying quiet, enduring disrespect, keeping the peace, that any of it had been worth it. I stepped outside 20 minutes later, needing air, needing distance from the noise and the lights, and the careful smiles of people who'd witnessed what happened, but weren't sure what to say. The night was cool, the parking lot mostly empty except for a few scattered vehicles, and the distant sound of traffic on the main road. I leaned against the brick wall near the entrance, focused on breathing, on steadying the anger that had been building for years, and finally found a target. The door opened behind me. I turned, expecting Dad, but it was the older man from inside. He moved carefully, his cane tapping against the pavement, his expression apologetic. "I hope I didn't overstep," he said. "I don't make a habit of grabbing people." I shook my head. "You didn't. Thank you." He nodded, seemed satisfied, and turned to leave. Then paused. "For what it's worth," he said, "that brooch, your great-uncle earned it. Normandy, 1944. Saved his entire squad when their position got overrun. Died 3 days later from wounds he took doing it." I stared at him. "How did you know?" "I didn't serve with him. But I knew men who did. That insignia's distinctive if you know what you're looking at." He glanced back toward the door. "Some people see a piece of metal and think it's jewelry. Others see what it cost." He left before I could ask his name. I stood there alone for another few minutes before Dad came out. He looked older suddenly, more tired than I'd seen him in years. He didn't apologize again. He just stood next to me, hands in his pockets, staring at the parking lot. "She crossed a line," he said finally. "Yeah, I should have said something earlier. All those little comments, the way she talked to you. I thought if I ignored it, it'd stop. It's not your fault." "It is, though. Part of it." He looked at me. "She made you feel small in my house. And I let her." I didn't argue. He wasn't wrong. We stood in silence for a while longer, the kind of silence we'd always been comfortable with, the kind that didn't need filling. Inside, I could hear music starting, the gala shifting into its social phase. I didn't want to go back in. I didn't want to smile, to pretend, to navigate conversations with people who'd seen me humiliated and weren't sure how to acknowledge it. "I'm going to head out," I said. Dad nodded. "I'll deal with Lynn." "You don't have to, I do." His voice was firm, the same tone he'd used when I was young and needed to understand something wasn't negotiable. "This isn't on you to fix." I drove back to the base alone, the brooch still pinned to my dress, slightly crooked from where Lynn had grabbed it. I didn't cry. I didn't feel particularly sad. I felt something closer to clarity, the kind that comes when a situation you've been avoiding finally forces itself into focus. Over the next few days, I reviewed everything. Not obsessively, not with the intention of building a case, but methodically. I thought about the money I'd given them over the years. The medical bills, the home repairs, the unexpected expenses that always seemed to appear when my bank account was healthy. I thought about the leave I'd rearranged, the plans I'd canceled, the times I'd prioritized their needs over my own rest. I thought about Lynn's small cruelties, the comments that seemed harmless individually but accumulated into something corrosive. The way she'd rewritten histories, taken credit for support she hadn't provided, positioned herself as central to achievements she had nothing to do with. I realized I'd been over-functioning for years, compensating for her lack of contribution by contributing more myself. Absorbing her disrespect because confronting it would create conflict, and conflict would hurt Dad. But staying quiet had hurt him too. It had allowed Lynn to believe she could treat me however she wanted without consequences. It had taught her that my boundaries were negotiable, that my dignity was expendable in service of keeping the peace. A few days later, one of my colleagues, Lieutenant Colonel Mara Lynn, stopped by my office. We'd worked together on several joint operations, developed a friendship built on mutual respect and the kind of honesty that's rare in professional settings. I heard about the gala, she said, closing the door behind her. I didn't ask how. Word travels in military circles, especially when something unusual happens. I'm fine, I said. I know you are. But I wanted to tell you something my grandmother used to say. She sat down across from me. People tell you who they are by how they treat what they think you can't live without. I looked at her, waiting. Your stepmother thought you couldn't live without your father's approval. So she felt safe disrespecting you because she assumed you'd tolerate anything to keep that relationship intact. Mara leaned forward slightly. But the thing is, she was wrong. You can live without his approval. You've been doing it your whole career. What you can't live without is your self-respect. The words settled into place like pieces of a puzzle I'd been trying to solve for years. Lynn believed I wouldn't challenge her. She believed rank meant nothing outside the chain of command. She believed professionalism was the same as weakness, that my restraint was fear, that my patience was surrender. She'd mistaken every boundary I hadn't enforced for a boundary that didn't exist. I thought about the brooch, about my mother, about the great uncle I'd never met who died protecting people he'd never see again. I thought about the cost of service, the weight of responsibility, the choice to stand firm even when it's uncomfortable. And I realized something I should have understood years ago. Sometimes protecting yourself is the most important mission you'll ever have. I called Dad 2 days later and asked if we could meet. Not at the house. Somewhere neutral. He suggested a diner we used to go to when I was younger, the kind of place with vinyl booths and coffee that tasted like it had been sitting on the burner too long. He was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth, hands wrapped around a mug. He looked up when I walked in, and I saw the weariness in his face, the knowledge that this conversation wasn't going to be easy. I sat down across from him. A waitress brought me coffee without asking. We waited until she left. Lynn's been staying at a friend's house, Dad said. Since the gala. I didn't ask her to leave. I know. I told her she needed space to think about what she did. He stared into his coffee. She's been calling, texting, trying to explain. What's she saying? That she was stressed. That the lighting was bad. That your dress was misleading. He shook his head. Everything except an actual apology. I wasn't surprised. I need to tell you something, I said. And I need you to hear it without defending her. Dad nodded. Lynn doesn't respect me. She hasn't for years. The gala wasn't a one-time thing. It was the culmination of every small dismissal, every casual cruelty, every comment designed to make me feel less than. I kept my voice level factual. She's rewritten history to take credit for things she didn't do. She's minimized my contributions while maximizing her own. She's used my rank for social currency while simultaneously resenting me for having it. Dad's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. I've tolerated it because I didn't want to put you in the middle. I didn't want to make you choose. But what happened at the gala made me realize something. By staying quiet, I've been teaching her that my boundaries don't matter. That she can treat me however she wants as long as she's careful about it. I should have seen it, Dad said quietly. Maybe. But I made it easy not to. I kept showing up, kept helping, kept pretending everything was fine. I wrapped my hands around the coffee mug, anchoring myself. I'm not doing that anymore. What are you saying? I'm saying Lynn doesn't get access to me anymore. She doesn't get my time, my money, my patience. She doesn't get to attend military functions with me. She doesn't get to introduce me as her stepdaughter while actively undermining me. I looked at him directly. I'm not cutting you out, but I'm drawing a line with her. And it's not negotiable. Dad was quiet for a long time. I could see him processing, weighing loyalties, trying to find a middle path that wouldn't exist. She's going to say you're overreacting, he said finally. I know. She's going to blame your career, say the military's made you cold. I know. She's going to try to guilt me into fixing this. I know. I leaned forward slightly. But this isn't something you can fix, Dad. This is between me and her. And the only person who can repair it is her, by actually acknowledging what she did and changing her behavior. Not with excuses. Not with justifications. With actual accountability. He nodded slowly. I don't think she knows how to do that. Then we have a problem. We sat in silence for a while, the diner's background noise filling the space between us. Dad looked older than his years, carrying the weight of a situation he hadn't created but couldn't escape. I'm sorry, he said eventually. For all of it. For not seeing what was happening. For letting her treat you that way in my house. I know you are. What do you need from me? I need you to stop trying to smooth this over. I need you to let her sit with the consequences of her actions instead of protecting her from them. I paused. And I need you to know that no matter what happens between me and Lynn, you and I are solid. That part doesn't change. Relief washed over his face, so visible it made my chest ache. He'd been afraid of losing me. I could see it clearly now, the fear that had kept him quiet, that had made him tolerate Lynn's behavior rather than risk the conflict that might drive me away. But he had it backward. The risk wasn't in confronting Lynn. The risk was in letting her continue unchecked until the damage became irreparable. 2 days later, Lynn called me. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail, her tone carefully modulated, hitting notes of confusion and hurt. I don't understand why you're upset. I made a mistake. Can we please talk about this like adults? The framing was perfect. I was the one being unreasonable. She was the mature one trying to reach out. I deleted the message. She tried again a few days later, this time via text. A long paragraph about stress, about misunderstandings, about how much she valued our relationship. Not one word acknowledging what she'd actually done. Not one word taking responsibility. I didn't respond. Her friends started reaching out, people I barely knew, sending messages about how Lynn was really struggling and didn't understand what went wrong. They positioned themselves as mediators, as people who could help bridge the gap if I'd just be willing to meet Lynn halfway. I told them all the same thing. This was between me and Lynn, and I wasn't interested in discussing it with third parties. One of them pushed back, suggested I was being harsh, that families work through things. I blocked her number. Meanwhile, Lynn's version of events started circulating through her social network. She'd been humiliated at a military event by her stepdaughter, who'd let some veteran grab her over a simple misunderstanding. She was the victim of military arrogance, of a daughter who'd let her career go to her head. I heard about it through the same cousin who'd mentioned Lynn's earlier comments. She called me, angry on my behalf, wanting to know if I wanted her to correct the record. No, I said. Let her tell whatever story she needs to tell. The people who matter know the truth. She's making you look bad. To people who don't know me. I can live with that. The truth was simpler than Lynn wanted to admit. She'd grabbed something valuable off my dress in public, accused me of theft, and been corrected by a stranger who recognized what she didn't. Everything that followed was consequence, not punishment. But acknowledging that would require Lynn to accept responsibility for her actions. And based on every message, every attempted conversation, every story she told her friends, that wasn't something she was capable of doing. So the boundary stayed in place. Firm, clear, not up for negotiation. 3 months passed. Lynn stopped calling. The messages from her friends tapered off, then stopped entirely. Dad mentioned her occasionally, updates delivered in careful neutral tones designed not to pressure me. She was still at her friend's house. She was looking for her own place. She was talking about moving to a different city, starting fresh somewhere people didn't know the story. How are you with all of it? I asked him during one of our regular calls. Tired, he admitted. But better. The house is quieter. I knew what he meant. Not the absence of noise, but the absence of tension. The low-level stress that came from managing someone else's moods, walking carefully to avoid triggering criticism, performing emotional labor that never quite felt reciprocated. Without Lynn's constant demands, spoken and unspoken, Dad had started rebuilding small routines he'd let go. He'd rejoined his veterans group, something Lynn had complained about because it took time away from home projects she wanted done. He'd started having coffee with old friends from the shop, relationships that had faded under Lynn's subtle disapproval of anything that didn't include her. I didn't realize how much I'd given up, he said one evening. Little things. But they added up. I understood. I'd given up things too. Peace of mind. Boundaries. The assumption that showing up for family meant being treated with basic respect. For my part, life had simplified. Without the expectation of regular visits, without the emotional preparation required to navigate Lynn's moods, I had bandwidth I'd forgotten existed. I slept better, worked more efficiently, spent time with friends without the nagging guilt that I should be visiting Dad instead. The irony wasn't lost on me. Cutting Lynn out had made my relationship with Dad stronger. We talked more frequently, conversations less fraught because they weren't happening under Lynn's watchful management. He asked better questions about my work, listened more carefully, seemed genuinely curious about the life I'd built rather than viewing it through Lynn's lens of career-obsessed absence. I made the promotion list for Brigadier General, '07, in early fall. The notification came through official channels first, then a call from my commanding officer, then messages from colleagues who'd heard before I'd processed it myself. I called Dad immediately. He answered on the second ring. 1 star, I said. The silence on his end lasted just long enough for me to worry. Then, your mother would be so proud. Yeah, I am too. I hope you know that. I do. He asked about the timeline, the next assignment, what it would mean for my schedule. Normal questions, the kind that showed he was paying attention, that he understood what this meant beyond the rank itself. Lynn's going to hear about it, he said eventually. Probably. She'll want to reach out. Take credit, maybe. I don't know. She can want whatever she wants. Doesn't mean I have to respond. He was quiet for a moment. You've gotten harder. No. I've just stopped pretending boundaries are negotiable. Another pause. I like this version of you. Calmer. He was right. I was calmer. The constant low-level anxiety about managing Lynn's reactions, about keeping peace, about being enough, it had all lifted when I'd stopped trying. The official pinning ceremony was small, held at the command center with a handful of senior officers and my immediate team. Dad drove up for it, made the 6-hour trip without complaint, stood in the front row while the Brigadier General stars were pinned to my shoulders. Lynn didn't come. I hadn't invited her. Dad hadn't asked if he should. After the ceremony, we went to dinner at a quiet restaurant off base. Just the two of us, the way it used to be before Lynn entered the picture. We talked about work, about his veterans group, about a project he was building in his workshop. Normal conversation, easy and unforced. Have you heard from her? I asked, not because I wanted to reopen the door, but because I was curious where things stood. She called a few weeks ago. Asked if I'd talk to you about reconciliation. What did you say? That it wasn't my place. That if she wanted to fix things, she needed to talk to you directly. And that she needed to actually apologize, not just explain. How'd she take it? He smiled slightly. Not well. She said I was choosing you over her. You told her that's not how it works. I did. Told her I'm not choosing anyone. I'm just not running interference anymore. He looked at me across the table. She didn't like that. She wouldn't. We finished dinner, drove back to his hotel, said goodnight without drama or heavy conversations. Just a hug, a promise to call soon, the comfortable understanding that we'd found our footing again. I drove back to base thinking about leadership, about the difference between authority and control, about how real strength shows up in the ability to hold boundaries without cruelty. Lynn had confused control with connection. She'd believed that managing everyone's behavior, controlling the narrative, positioning herself at the center of every story, that those things created family. But family isn't built on control. It's built on trust. And trust requires honesty, accountability, the willingness to admit when you're wrong. Lynn had never learned that. Maybe she couldn't. Either way, it wasn't my problem to solve anymore. I'd removed myself from a system where I'd been over-functioning for years, where my contributions were taken for granted while my boundaries were dismissed. The natural consequence of that removal was watching Lynn's carefully constructed world lose its foundation. I didn't interfere. I didn't gloat. I simply watched from a distance as she struggled to maintain the lifestyle she'd curated without the benefits of my regular support. It wasn't revenge. It was just the truth revealing itself. When you build your life on someone else's labor, it collapses when they stop providing it. Lynn called in late November. I saw her name on my phone and hesitated, thumb hovering over the screen. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to let the call go to voicemail like I'd done before. But something made me answer. Melissa. Her voice was careful, measured. Thank you for picking up. What do you need, Lynn? I'd like to talk. In person. Clear the air. I almost laughed. The air's pretty clear from where I'm standing. Please. Just coffee. One conversation. Against my better judgment, I agreed. Not because I thought anything would change, but because I wanted to see if she'd actually use the word sorry, or if she'd continue the pattern of explaining without apologizing. We met at a cafe halfway between the base and Dad's house. Lynn was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table, hands wrapped around a cup she probably wasn't drinking. She'd lost weight, looked older, more tired. The polished veneer she'd always maintained had cracked. I sat down across from her. Waited. I wanted to apologize, she started. For what happened at the gala. And for everything leading up to it. It was a good opening. Almost believable. Okay, I said. She seemed thrown by the lack of reaction. I've had time to think. To reflect on my behavior. I realize I wasn't always fair to you. Not always fair was a hell of an understatement. I think things got out of hand, she continued. Tensions built up. We both said and did things we regret. And there it was. The pivot. The implication that this was mutual, that we'd both contributed equally to the breakdown. What did I do? I asked quietly. She blinked. What? You said we both did things we regret. What did I do that you think I should regret? Well, you became distant. You stopped helping. You shut me out. I set boundaries after years of disrespect. That's not the same thing as what you did. Her expression hardened slightly. This is exactly the problem. You're so rigid. So black and white. You can't see how your military mindset affects. Stop. I kept my voice level. You asked for this conversation. If you're going to spend it blaming my career, explaining why your behavior wasn't that bad, or suggesting I'm too sensitive, we're done here. She sat back, realizing she'd miscalculated. I'm trying to apologize. No. You're trying to get back to normal without doing the work of actually acknowledging what you did. I leaned forward slightly. You grabbed something off my dress in public. You accused me of theft. You tried to rip off a family heirloom because you couldn't believe I'd earned the right to wear it. And in the months since, you've told everyone who'll listen that I'm the problem. I was stressed, I don't care. Stress doesn't make you grab people. Stress doesn't make you cruel. You made a choice. Multiple choices over years to treat me like I was less than. And when someone finally stopped you, when you faced consequences for your behavior, you blamed everyone but yourself. She opened her mouth, closed it. Her eyes were wet, but I couldn't tell if the tears were genuine or tactical. I know you want things to go back to the way they were, I continued. But there is no going back. There's only forward. And going forward requires you to actually change your behavior, not just explain why it wasn't your fault. You're asking me to grovel. I'm asking you to be honest. With yourself, if not with me. Lynn shook her head slowly. You've changed. You used to be softer. I used to mistake endurance for love. I don't anymore. She stood up, gathering her things with jerky, irritated movements. I tried. I came here, I apologized, I offered to fix things. If that's not good enough for you, I don't know what else you want. I want you to actually mean it. But I don't think you know how. She left without another word, the cafe door closing hard behind her. I sat there for a few more minutes, finishing the coffee I'd barely touched, feeling the familiar tightness in my chest that came from confrontation. But underneath it, something else, relief. I'd held the boundary. I hadn't bent, hadn't softened, hadn't let her guilt or tears or carefully worded non-apologies move me. When I called Dad later, he asked how it went. About like you'd expect, I said. She tell you I forced her to call you? No. Should she have? She's been saying I'm too hard on her. That I've changed since she and I started having problems. He sighed. Maybe I have. But not in the way she means. What way do you mean? I stopped pretending I didn't see what was happening. That's not the same as changing. That's just being honest. I understood exactly what he meant. Over the following weeks, Lynn's presence in Dad's life faded to near absence. She moved to a different city, 2 states away, took a job managing a boutique hotel. Dad heard about it through mutual acquaintances. She didn't tell him directly. He seemed okay with it. Not happy, not celebratory, just, okay. I tried, he said one evening. I wanted it to work. But I couldn't keep pretending her behavior was acceptable just to keep her around. I'm proud of you for that. Yeah, me too. The holidays came and went. Dad and I spent Thanksgiving together, just us, cooking too much food and watching football. It felt like coming home to something I'd forgotten existed, simplicity, ease, the absence of performance. Christmas was quieter still. I sent Lynn a card, polite, impersonal, the kind of gesture you make to acknowledge someone's existence without inviting them back into your life. She didn't respond. I didn't expect her to. The trust I'd lost wasn't with her. It had been with myself. Trust that I could hold boundaries. Trust that I deserved respect, not just compliance. Trust that protecting myself wasn't selfish, it was necessary. And slowly, carefully, I built that trust back. Winter transitioned to spring. My new assignment as Brigadier General came with responsibilities that pushed me in ways I hadn't anticipated: strategic planning, high-level coordination, decisions that affected thousands of personnel and millions in resources. The work was demanding, but it felt right. I'd earned this position through decades of competence, leadership, and the kind of sustained excellence that doesn't happen by accident. Dad started coming to visit me more often, making the drive up to base to see where I worked, meet the people I supervised, understand the scope of what I did. Lynn had never been interested in those details. She'd wanted the status without the substance, the ability to say her stepdaughter was a general without actually caring what that meant. Dad cared. He asked questions, listened to the answers, took pride in the work I did without making it about himself. One weekend in April, we attended another military event, smaller than the gala, a recognition ceremony for veterans transitioning to civilian careers. I wore my uniform, ribbons and decorations in place, the weight of them familiar and grounding. We were standing near the refreshment table when an older veteran approached. Not the same man from the gala, but someone similar: Army, probably late 60s, walking with the careful deliberation of someone managing old injuries. He looked at my uniform, at the single star on each shoulder, and smiled. "Brigadier General," he said. "That's no small thing." "Thank you." He noticed the brooch I wore on my civilian jacket. I'd worn both, changing between the ceremony and the reception. His expression shifted, recognition flickering across his face. "May I?" he asked, gesturing toward it. I nodded. He leaned closer, not touching, just looking. Then straightened. "Your great-uncle?" "Yes." He'd be proud it's still in the family. That it's being worn by someone who understands what it means. Something in my chest loosened. Not broke, loosened. The tight knot of anger and hurt I'd been carrying since the gala, since the moment Lynn had tried to rip this piece of my history off my dress, finally released. "Thank you," I said, and meant it. He nodded once, the way veterans do, and moved on. Dad was quiet beside me. When I glanced at him, I saw his eyes were wet. "You okay?" I asked. "Yeah, just thinking about your mom. About how she'd have loved to see this." He gestured vaguely at the room, at my uniform, at the life I'd built. "All of it. I think about that sometimes too." We stood together in comfortable silence, watching people move through the space, veterans and active duty mixing with families and supporters. It was a good event. The kind that reminded you why the work mattered. I'd started noticing small joys again over the past few months. Things I'd lost track of while managing Lynn's constant drains on my energy and attention. Weekend bike rides without guilt about not visiting Dad. Actually finishing books instead of reading the same page 3 times because my mind was elsewhere. Cooking meals that took effort, that required focus, instead of just eating whatever was fast. Calling friends without the nagging sense that I should be spending that time differently. My home felt calmer. Not emptier, calmer. The absence of tension created space for peace I hadn't realized I was missing. Dad noticed. He mentioned it one evening when I called to check in. "You sound different," he said. "Different how?" "Lighter. Happier." He was right. I was happier. Not because Lynn was gone from my life. Her presence or absence didn't define my happiness. But because I'd stopped apologizing for protecting myself. I'd stopped believing that enduring disrespect was the price of keeping family together. I'd learned that family isn't just who you're related to. It's who shows up with honesty, who treats you with respect, who earns their place in your life through consistent behavior, not just blood or law. Lynn had confused access with relationship. She'd believed that marrying my father entitled her to my time, my resources, my tolerance of her behavior. But entitlement isn't love. Control isn't connection. And I didn't owe her forgiveness she hadn't earned. A few weeks later, I received a message from the veteran who'd intervened at the gala. Someone had connected us through mutual contacts, and he'd reached out to check in. His name was retired First Sergeant Daniel Cross. He'd served 32 years in the Army, multiple deployments, the kind of career that left marks you carried forever. I hope I didn't overstep that night, his message said. I just couldn't stand by and watch someone disrespect what your family sacrificed. I wrote back thanking him, explaining what the brooch meant, how it connected me to family history I'd never fully known. We exchanged a few more messages. He shared stories about men he'd served with, what leadership looked like in impossible situations, how you know when someone has earned their authority versus when they're just wearing the rank. Real leaders don't need to announce themselves, he wrote. They don't need to control everyone around them. They just show up, do the work, and earn trust through consistency. It was the kind of wisdom that only comes from decades of experience, from seeing leadership succeed and fail in high-stakes environments. I thought about Lynn, about how desperately she'd needed control, how threatened she'd been by any suggestion that she wasn't essential. I thought about the difference between confidence and insecurity, between authority and tyranny. And I realized something I probably should have understood years earlier. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply stop participating in someone else's dysfunction. Not with anger. Not with drama. Just with clarity. I'd removed myself from a system that required me to diminish myself for someone else's comfort. And in doing so, I'd created space for the version of myself I'd always been, but had forgotten how to access. The final message I sent to Daniel said simply, "Thank you for seeing what needed to be seen. And for acting when it mattered." His response came an hour later. "That's what we do. We look out for each other." Spring turned to early summer. Work continued, briefings, training exercises, personnel decisions that required careful judgment and clear communication. I'd settled into the rhythm of the new rank, the expanded responsibilities, the weight of decisions that affected more people than I'd ever supervised before. Dad and I maintained our regular contact. Weekly calls, monthly visits when schedules allowed, the occasional text about nothing in particular. The relationship had found its equilibrium, no longer mediated through Lynn's presence or shaped by her reactions. I heard about Lynn occasionally, second-hand updates that filtered through Dad's remaining connections to her social circle. She'd established herself in the new city, developed a new routine, seemed to be managing. I felt nothing about these updates. Not satisfaction, not concern. Just neutral acknowledgement that she was living her life somewhere else. One evening in June, Dad called with an unusual request. "There's a community event here next month," he said, honoring local veterans and their families. They asked if I'd speak briefly about your mom's family history. About the brooch. What did you tell them? That I'd need to check with you first. It's your story as much as mine. I thought about it. About the brooch, about what it represented, about the years of carrying it without fully understanding its weight. "Tell them yes," I said. "I'll come too, if the date works." "You don't have to, I want to." The event was held at the local community center, maybe 200 people in attendance. Veterans from multiple generations, families, local officials, people who cared about preserving military history and honoring service. Dad spoke for 10 minutes. He talked about my mother, about her great-uncle who'd earned the Medal of Honor at Normandy, about the sacrifice that achievement represented. He talked about family legacies, about the responsibility of carrying forward the memory of people who gave everything for others. He didn't mention Lynn. Didn't allude to the gala, to the confrontation, to any of the painful history that had brought us to this moment. He simply told the story truthfully, with the respect it deserved. When he finished, people applauded. Not because the story was dramatic or surprising, but because it was real. Because it connected them to something larger than individual experience. Afterward, several veterans approached. They wanted to see the brooch, to hear more details, to share their own family stories of service and sacrifice. One woman, probably in her 70s, told me her father had served in the same division as my great-uncle. She'd heard stories about the battle, about the impossible odds, about the men who didn't make it home. "Your family should be proud," she said. "We are." I stood in that community center, surrounded by people who understood the cost of service, and felt something shift. Not dramatically, not with fanfare. Just a quiet recognition that I'd arrived at a place I'd been moving toward for years without fully knowing it. Peace. Not the absence of conflict, but the presence of clarity. I'd removed someone toxic from my life. I'd held boundaries when it was uncomfortable. I'd refused to apologize for protecting myself. And in doing so, I'd created space for the relationships that actually mattered to thrive. Dad and I drove home together after the event. We stopped for dinner at the same diner where we'd had our conversation months earlier, the one where I'd told him I was drawing a line with Lynn. "Thank you for coming today," he said over coffee. "Of course. I mean it. It mattered. Having you there, continuing the story forward." He looked at me across the table. "Your mom would have been proud. Not just of the rank, but of how you handled everything with Lynn. The way you stood up for yourself without being cruel about it. I learned that from you. The standing up part, I mean." He smiled. "I learned the boundary part from you. So I guess we're even." We finished our meal, drove back to his house, said goodnight without the weight of unspoken tension that had characterized so many previous visits. Just simple, honest connection between two people who understood each other. I drove back to base thinking about the path that had brought me here. The years of service, the promotions earned through competence and consistency, the relationships built on trust rather than control. I thought about the mistakes I'd made staying quiet too long, overfunctioning in someone else's dysfunction, believing that endurance was the same as strength. But I also thought about what I'd learned, that real strength isn't about how much you can endure. It's about knowing when to stop enduring and start protecting yourself. That boundaries aren't punitive. They're protective. That you can love someone and still refuse to accept their disrespect. That sometimes the peace you're looking for starts the moment you stop apologizing for protecting yourself. The brooch sat in its case on my desk, visible but not worn daily. I'd take it out sometimes, hold it carefully, think about the man who'd earned it and never came home. About the weight of that sacrifice, the ripple effects through generations, the responsibility of carrying forward a legacy of service. Lynn had seen metal and assumed theft. She'd looked at something valuable and couldn't imagine I'd earned the right to wear it. But she was wrong. Not just about the brooch, about everything. I'd earned my place. Through years of work, through consistent leadership, through the kind of sustained excellence that doesn't happen by accident or by someone else's efforts. And I'd earned my peace. By setting boundaries, by refusing to participate in my own diminishment, by choosing dignity over false harmony. The final lesson, the one that took me longest to learn, you don't owe anyone access to your life just because they want it. Access is earned. Trust is built. Respect is required. And when someone shows you through consistent behavior that they're incapable of those things, when they grab for what isn't theirs, when they minimize your worth, when they rewrite history to center themselves, you have every right to walk away. Not with anger. Not with vindictiveness. Just with clarity. Sometimes the peace you're looking for starts the moment you stop apologizing for protecting yourself. And sometimes the greatest act of strength is simply knowing when you're done carrying someone else's weight. I was done. And I was lighter for it. 15 years later, I stood in the reception hall at Fort Myer, wearing 3 stars on each shoulder. Lieutenant General. Oh, 9. The promotion ceremony had concluded an hour earlier, and now came the part I'd always found simultaneously meaningful and exhausting. The social obligations, the handshakes, the photographs with people I barely knew. Dad was 83 now, moving slower but still sharp, still steady. He'd flown in from Arizona, where he'd retired 5 years ago to be closer to his sister. We talked every week without fail, visited when we could, maintained the bond we'd rebuilt after Lynn's exit from our lives. I hadn't thought about her in years. Not consciously, anyway. She'd become a footnote, a difficult chapter that had taught me important lessons but no longer occupied mental real estate. I'd heard through distant channels that she'd remarried, moved overseas, built a different life entirely. Good for her. I meant it. A young captain approached, hesitant but determined. "Ma'am, there's someone asking to speak with you. She says she's family." My stomach tightened reflexively. "Who?" "Lynn Hutchins. She said she used to be your stepmother." I looked across the room and saw her. Older, obviously. 72 now, hair gone silver, face lined in ways that suggested hard years rather than graceful aging. She stood near the entrance, clutching a small purse, looking simultaneously defiant and uncertain. Dad appeared at my elbow. I didn't know she'd be here. Neither did I. "You don't have to talk to her." "I know." But curiosity pulled me forward. Not hope for reconciliation, That ship had sailed long ago, but genuine curiosity about what could bring someone back after 15 years of silence. I crossed the room. Lynn saw me coming and straightened, trying to summon the confidence she'd once wielded so easily. Melissa. Congratulations. 3 stars. That's remarkable. Thank you. What are you doing here, Lynn? I saw the announcement online. I wanted to see you. To tell you I'm proud. She paused. And to apologize. Really apologize, not the way I tried before. I studied her face, looking for the manipulation I'd learned to recognize. But what I saw instead was something closer to resignation. Not redemption, exactly. Just the weariness of someone who'd finally run out of road. It's been 15 years, I said quietly. I know. I needed that long to understand what I did wrong. What I kept doing wrong, even after you tried to tell me. She glanced at Dad, who'd followed me over. I hurt both of you. I made everything about me, about my image, about what I needed. And I lost the only family that mattered because of it. I didn't respond immediately. Around us, the reception continued, background noise that gave me space to think. I don't need you to forgive me, Lynn continued. I'm not asking for that. I just wanted you to know I finally understand. That you were right. That I spent years blaming you for setting boundaries when I should have been thanking you for being honest enough to set them. Dad's hand touched my elbow gently. A question, not a directive. I appreciate you saying that, I told Lynn. I do. But 15 years is a long time. We've both built different lives. I know. I'm not asking to be part of yours. She managed a small, sad smile. I just wanted to see you succeed. To know that you made it here despite me, not because of anything I did. And to say I'm sorry I tried to take that from you. She turned to leave, then paused. The brooch. The one I grabbed. Do you still have it? Yes. Good. It belongs with you. It always did. She walked away, disappearing into the crowd and then out the door. I stood there, Dad beside me, processing the unexpected encounter. How do you feel? He asked. Honestly? Okay. She said what she needed to say. I heard it. But it doesn't change anything. We're still done. Good. He squeezed my arm. Now, let's go enjoy your accomplishment. You earned every bit of it. We rejoined the reception, and I didn't look back. Thanks for sticking with me through this. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had someone underestimate you so badly it changed the entire relationship? Have you ever had to pull back, set a boundary, or walk away from someone who kept taking you for granted? Drop your story in the comments. And if this resonated with you, hit like, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs to be reminded of their own worth. I'll see you in the next one.